to allow for time to pass without any action and without any solution, and to just experience. And I think that slowdown is an absolute, if there is any chance to survive, I think that kind of slowing down through listening and meditation and through not doing so much, I think there's some hope in that.
So I'm with Hildegard Westerkamp. Welcome to the Conscient podcast. What I've been doing with most of my guests is asking them just to introduce themselves, because I've known you for I don't know how many years, a long time, and it's really a pleasure to have you to have this conversation with you. So, Hildi, can you just give us a brief overview of who you are and how you identify yourself?
Right now I'm in my garden with you.
Yes.
And the image I have is of you walking through a concert space with your clarinet, playing it and walking in a contemporary music context. And I thought, who is this guy? You were exploring the space of that concert hall with your clarinet, and there was an energy there that I found exceedingly interesting. That was the first thing that came to mind as you were introducing me. I compose with environmental sounds mostly. I'm deeply interested in listening to the environment and have always been a bit of an activist in terms of the ecological issues of our sound environment, and have waffled between that activist self that wants to improve the world, that wants to make it qualitatively more interesting, acoustically more interesting, and the composer who works with environmental sounds musically and wants to create a piece. And so I've been in that spectrum all my life, back and forth. And so I find it hard to say I'm a composer. Sometimes I think I'm a writer of sound. I also like to write about sound and the experience of listening. And have been very involved with the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology, with the World Soundscape Project, where we seriously try to consider what it means to have a balanced soundscape in the environment.
That's a good beginning. People can read more about you and listen to your music, importantly, because that's a big part of who you are. I'm starting also with by asking the question of if you have any responses or thoughts to the program, the episode called Reality. I know you've listened to it. So what came to mind when you listened to it?
I thought you created a very beautiful balance between the letting the words of people speak and letting the language of environmental sounds speak together. I feel there's a beautiful dialogue going on there, and the sounds that you put in there have their sometimes funny commentary almost, sometimes just puzzling, like, why is this sound in here right now? And what, is that Claude's imagination speaking here? And I felt that very much so. There is an ear of yours in there that I really appreciate, because it wants reality, and it wants us to hear it. And I like the fact that I could hear other people's wisdoms in the kind of sort of quotation format with your voice. And some of the quotes just absolutely blew my mind. And they grounded me in terms of the issue around climate change, about extinction, about the grief around that. In fact, I feel like your podcast probably made me listen up a little bit more than I have up to now. I haven't really opened up to the idea of it, and it's been there, but it made me want to read more. It made me want to watch some films. It made me want to listen to it in ways that I like listening, really.
Environmental Humanities Professor Jennifer Atkinson. Eco-anxiety and climate grief are sometimes framed as disorders. But in fact, these feelings typically arise from an accurate perception of our ecological crisis. It may be more appropriate to identify eco-anxiety as a moral emotion, a sign of compassion, attachment to life, and desire for justice. And what about your own work? How do you address issues? You've addressed environmental issues through sound walking and other types of practices, but the issue of climate change and art, and specifically acoustic or soundscape art, how does one, or how do you approach that?
I don't know.
Right.
I have not been able to address it in that sort of overt way. Other than
well, I think you have.
Can you tell me? Well, I have done it through the long practice of listening. When you recognize that this kind of listening, you can't avoid hearing what's going on, and you also after a while don't want to avoid it anymore, because what I realize, it is actually very, very grounding to face those things. And when you do that through listening, something else happens. And I've encountered by pursuing more of the writings and people that I've met through your podcast, is that the word listening is coming up all the time, that we have to listen.
Writer Richard Wagamese. To use the act of breathing to shape air into sounds that take on the context of language, that lifts and transports those that hear it, takes them beyond what they think and know and feel, and empowers them to think and feel and know even more.
Of course, what I often say is that when we are listening, we are slowing down to the way time passes in our lives, which means we are listening to the here and now. We're present to the here and now. When we get away from our inner chatter, our inner voices, and we direct our listening to what is meeting us out there, then we are in tune with the time passing. And I've always found it fascinating to think that when I listen to one of the fastest transportation modes, the airplane, in the wilderness, I have to slow down, because it will take at least 7 minutes for that plane to pass. And in those 7 minutes, something happens. you're listening to this airplane that's speeding across the above the earth, and we're in Europe in 9 hours from Vancouver, and yet down at the ground where I am, in a very quiet wilderness, let's say, it in terms of our own life, and in comparison to listening to music or language, environmental sound slows us down, and we are in tune with that time passing. And to be in tune with that has some connection, and I find it very hard to articulate. It has some connection with the pace of the earth, with the pace of nature. It has something to do with listening to something that does not respond, that does not speak back to us, does not judge, does not ask us to respond. We're just there. And that feeling of being there with the earth, with whatever is happening, without the need to respond or to be someone or to be a social being, that moment feels to me like I'm actually beginning to be part of, I don't want to say nature, but part of that moment. And it seems to me that we've got to listen to how time passes on this earth and what we've done to it. And there is knowledge about being in relation with the earth in the indigenous world. That is huge information for us, and I feel I know way too little about that. I would like to know more about it, or rather than I would like to be more in that mode of understanding how we form relationships with the environment, beyond the ecological, beyond it's more than ecology, really. It's more than to study the balance of something. It's to do with. The other day I was thinking, maybe I should imagine what it's like to be a tulip bulb in my garden, or to be the maple tree in my garden. That sort of thinking. Mm-hmm. It's all living beings, and to imagine it on that level, and not in any sort of new age way. More it's like, how am I rooted in this place? And how do I treat this place?
Activist Sheila Watt-Cloutier. It's important to recognize how closely linked environment, health, economics, culture, and rights are in our society. The earth is a living, breathing entity, just the same as our bodies are. Our survival utterly depends on living in nature, not apart from it.
I was thinking of having, just in order to get more sunshine into my garden, I had the maple tree branches cut back. Well, I just cut off some limbs of that tree. There's ways of thinking that the way we've been encultured, also as being a gardener. Are we a gardener, or are we actually in communication in a way that we know what the other beings need and say to us, and what they have to give? So the concept, as a German immigrant to Canada, the concept of the indigenous people throwing back what was not eaten of the salmon into the river was absolutely new to me. Like, why would you do that? And it took me some time to really get it, to that there is a giving back, that it creates a whole way of survival, right? I did not understand that coming from Europe. Europe is a big garden. Like, we're gardeners there. We're trying to rearrange, we're trying to sort of deal with what's already been destroyed and do it in the most beautiful way. I mean, you know, the landscape in Germany is very beautiful, and there's lots of trees, and I loved it there. But that fundamental reciprocity between nature and us, I think, has been lost completely. And in the cities, we've lost it. And part of me, as I get older, yearns for understanding that.
Well, the role of listening and silence has always been a friend to me in life, right? Because whether I record something or not, there's a sense of being present and in a moment when you really listen deeply. And there's different ways of listening: through your ears, through your body, through your hair, or whatever, however you listen. But what I find interesting in your work is the how you've used these tools, technology, so recording, which is an intervention. So you intervene into an environment, and then you curate some things to bring back, as whether you call it art or not. It doesn't matter so much, but it is a work. And so I'm interested to know, for instance, around sound walking, you've recorded them, and you use them as stimulants or as proposals to people. What does that bring the person experiencing it? Like, what is your intention when you create a work of say, a sound walk piece or an electroacoustic composition with soundscapes? What are you hoping will happen in the experience of the listener?
I would like them to experience what I did. The microphone, when you first experience listening to what the microphone hears, it's very different to what the ear hears. And when you hear that over your headphones into your own ears, there is a wake-up call there, and it's inspirational. And when I first began the sound walking radio program here in Vancouver, which is now a long time ago, in '79, I was very interested in letting the microphone guide me through the environment. And my own listening to what the microphone was picking up was then leading me through the city that, was, yes, I had lived in it for 10 years already, but I was still somewhere an immigrant. And it empowered me, actually, to walk into places that I wouldn't have walked into with just my ears, just a person. So the technology, and maybe because I am a woman, the technology gave me a sense of empowerment. So, I would walk into all sorts of spaces, and sometimes I was asked what I was doing, and, I had to get permission perhaps or not, but, for me it was a way into even the wilderness too. I think I've always felt that this wonder at what you hear when you really listen, and the surprises that you're met with, or the surprises that you get from what you're recording. And because in daily life, we're often preoccupied and we don't always listen, the microphone gives you the opportunity to just specialize in listening. And sound walks without microphones can do the same thing. You have to just have the intent of that listening. having always been a very busy and restless person, the microphone kind of allowed me to settle into that listening. And eventually, I really didn't want the microphone that much anymore, because I felt a separation between that very private listening inside the soundscape, but you were at the same time cut off from your social environment by doing that. I really, after a while, wanted to get rid of the microphones and then just really engage in that listening as if my ears were a microphone.
Well, I experienced a sound walk with you in Dieburg, Germany, when we were celebrating the 25 years of the World Forum for Acoustic Ecology, which you and me and a bunch of other people founded in '93 in Banff with Mary Schaefer.
That's
and
right, we did
people.
together.
It was a lot of fun. And I remember that I was surprised about how playful it was.
Right.
Just playing with the environment and being interacting, because the idea of going for a sound walk is a very pleasurable experience. Even if you're in a noisy place, you can discover all kinds of sounds. But it's also a way of life, right? To be aware of what's around us, and to allow our eyes and our ears to open up to what's really happening. So it kind of always comes back to reality, but not reality in this sort of simplistic way, but in the fullness of experience.
Yeah.
And I found sound walking is a nice, I don't know if it's an art form, but it's a nice process to engage, however it's done.
Yeah, you can do what you want with it, and it depends very much on the place and the group and the weather and on everything what you end up doing. You may have an idea of a route, and you may have set up something, a framework. It's really the framework that gives the boundaries to a sound walk, and then within that framework all sorts of things can happen. And it's again that surprise that happens that it is inspirational, because people suddenly notice something. And it may be a tiny detail. It might even be a smell, or it might be something visual that they notice. It doesn't matter. There's that attention that suddenly you think, oh my God, I've never noticed this about my neighborhood, let's say, right? Or I walk here all the time, and this it just completely new. It is an opportunity to listen, to relate in a new way. And the listening is really, in a way, the sound walk is an excuse to connect to the world. And, when you mentioned that we were, banging on this sculpture, when I saw that sculpture, I was immediately curious. Does it make sound if you bang on it? And when we did, not only could you bang on it, you could blow into the pipes, and you could find all these sounds, and it became a musical instrument. It not only is it fun, but it also makes you aware to what extent the materials that we put out there create sonic realities. And I think we really need to be aware of that, especially in urban environments, because a lot of it can be amplifying noises rather than reducing them. Sometimes it can be make a space calmer or not. And it has to do with design. It has to do with being thoughtful about what we put out there and how we do it. And so I like sound walks that are more where you don't do anything and you just listen. But there's also the other part where I think I really would like people to experience when you use your body to make sound, as we do in daily life. What kind of sound makers are we, and why? And we have a responsibility in our sound making. What do we buy that make sound. What does our house sound like? What do we sound like to our neighbors, etc., etc. So that awareness of how we form relationships through sound, or how we can block them, I think is just as important. And it extends right into the ecological issues and into climate change. Mm-hmm. Like, what are we putting out there? When we listen to our cities humming away, that's energy that's the voice of energy being overused, right? And can we just relate through our ears to what's happening out there? We can hear it. It's all there. And then I sometimes want to be much more analytical in the discussion after a sound walk than many people are prepared for. And I want to teach, I want to educate. So there's a fine balance between the aesthetic, the allowing people to listen and hear and interpret however they do it themselves, but also to say, look, there's social implications, there's political implications, there's environmental implications in all of this. And you have to decide as a soundwalk leader where you want to wake up more. Yes, one can leave everybody alone and say, this is, and people talk about what they perceived and what happened to them and their experiences. Very important that they understand why a sound affected them in a certain way and somebody else in the group didn't even notice it. There is psychological depth there, possibly. There may be connection to experiences from long ago, associations. That's just as important. So knowing oneself as a listener and understanding one's own responses and reactions to listening is just as important as understanding how our sound making affects our neighborhood, say. Right.
Well, you answered the question I was going to ask, which is, what is the connection between this type of sound practice and climate change? But you answered it very well, which is the world. If you pay attention to the world around us and notice the noise in the sense of an accumulated excess of activity that is damaging to the planet and to ourselves, and that's what's interesting about the legacy of the work that was done by yourself and many others around acoustic ecology, and is that idea that we can not only design a better acoustic environment, but we are acoustic beings. We are very much part of how the world unfolds, and if we listen both physically and sort of metaphorically to what's around us, we can't help but at a certain point want to change it. And then it becomes, how do you change it? What do you do? Exactly. Do you take things away? Do you and it's too easy to jump to solutions on something as complex as climate change, because there are no easy fixes.
Exactly.
A lot of things have been done; it can't be undone.
Yeah.
But being a sound artist myself, I'm really interested to explore the field that I know best, in terms of its relationship not just to climate change, but to issues like the just transition. We were talking about, privilege earlier. All of these issues that are complex. How do we relate to them as sound artists? How do we go about our work in ways that are more in touch with the realities of our world? And the reality of our world is is very sad, I think. Even though the world is a wonderfully joyful place, it's sad what's happening to us, what we've done to ourselves. So I love the idea of listening more carefully, but it's not just listening, it's what you do with that information.
Exactly. And you know, quite frankly, sometimes I do feel a little bit stuck in that thought, and I with delight see that there are so many studies about sound, say in the ocean, data gathering in nature, that the technology allows us now to plunk a microphone into the wilderness and then listen for hours. That microphone, the hard drive, accumulates all this information and allows us to listen back into it to begin to understand what the sonic world is doing in our absence, in the ocean or in the wilderness, and I think data gathering is double-edged, because you can't listen to every minute of those kinds of very, very long recordings. That's just not possible. And then there's an interpretation that may be automated, and I have problems with that. But there is an approach now through listening to the world that has just not happened before on that scale. And I think that's hopeful to me, that the approach of paying attention to what the sounds of nature actually have to say to us, what has disappeared, what have we not heard, for example. All those things are becoming now part of a scientific knowledge that may help in the approach towards climate change.
Writer Robin Wall Kimmerer. The land is the real teacher. All we need as students is mindfulness.
And I have no idea how to. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a scientist, and so and I'm too old. I can't participate in that anymore. But it's hopeful. Critical as I am about the data gathering aspects and the sort of loss of detailed listening in that, there is a sense of getting some sort of overview, perhaps, of what are the cycles in nature and how have they been changed by our interference, and how do they need to be preserved. There is material for improvement.
And there's also the artist's voice, the poetic interpretation of our world, and imagining worlds that don't exist yet. That can be it can be terrifying, or it can be hopeful, or it can be a bit of both. But
yeah, and the listening allows for new ideas to emerge. As we are silent and just listen and not react or respond very quickly, there's potential for a new approach. And that's where I'm grateful for, what you've been really involved in is the Zen meditation, that attending to some meditation practice has helped me to begin to be able to wait and be in the presence of what I'm experiencing, and not to move too quickly, even as an artist, right? To solutions, to try to get a peace. We do that too, right? Mm-hmm. To allow for time to pass without any action and without any solution, and to just experience. And I think that slowdown is an absolute, if there is any chance to survive, I think that kind of slowing down through listening and meditation and through not doing so much, I think there's some hope in that.